So, welcome to the third part of this talk that I'm giving some sort of background about what shamanism is and what shamanism isn't, and generally sort of chewing the fat on it a little bit. I thought I'd like to start this particular film by unpacking and going back over a couple of things that I said in the previous two, just to clarify a couple of points. I talked about the Americas, and I talked about how peoples from Eurasia, Mongolia, Siberia traveled across the Bering Straits and went down into the Americas, and that they did that before shamanism had evolved in Siberia. And so when they came into North America, they couldn't have brought it with them. All they could bring with them was the pre-shamanic animistic traditions. And for the main part, that is true, but there were different waves of settlers that crossed from Siberia into the Americas. The first ones kind of travelled the furthest down, as I understand it, and certainly the traditions in the Amazon were brought to that part before shamanism had developed in Siberia, and so it did arise rather separately because of the influence of the medicine plants, the teacher plants, the psychoactive plants such as ayahuasca and all of the other plants used down in that region. However, subsequent migrations of people from Siberia, the later ones, when they came in, there was some form of shamanism in Siberia, albeit perhaps a fairly primitive one. Shamanism was evolving out of that animistic route, and the people who were the last into the Americas, who tended to settle the furthest north. So we're talking about cultures like the Tlingit, the Haida, the Salish, the Coatl. Those cultures certainly do have a form of shamanism, and so it's a bit of a broad sweeping statement to say that there is no kind of shamanism in the Americas. For the main part, that is true, but it's not the complete picture. Certainly, as I say, the tribes further north have the most of shamanic kind of elements to their spirituality. The Ojibwe too are one of those, and obviously the Inuit people in Alaska really are basically exactly the same as the Inuit people across the other side of the Bering Straits in Siberia, and the people who live in Kamchatka. That whole kind of area is deeply shamanic, and so shamanism in the far north of the Americas is very much present. But the peoples of the northwest Pacific coast do have shamanic elements to it because they came in the later migrations, and they carried with them that kind of proto-shamanism, that early stage shamanism. I think probably while I'm talking about that, it's probably also quite good to look at the idea that shamanism is all around working with mind altering psychoactive plants and substances, be they man made or be they natural. And I would like to knock that on the head quite a lot too. Certainly in South America, in the Amazon, that's very much the case. But that shamanism, like I said, arose separately because of those plants. In the old world, for want of a better way of putting it, Siberia, Mongolia, that kind of part of the world, it's the minority generally who work with mind altering plants. And if you look at shamanism across the whole gamut of the world, it again is the minority. Most shamanic traditions and most shamanic cultures do not work with mind altering psychoactive plants. This view that shamanism equals psychoactive plants, I think, has arisen partially from the drug culture of the hippies in the 60s and the novels of Carlos Castaneda, and now with the recent rise of ayahuasca tourism and the sort of plethora of new age books and things like that, and websites and all of that stuff that talk about ethnogens online. And it's become a popular myth now that a shaman is somebody who takes some form of ethnogenic plant, gets high and has visions, and it just simply is not the case. There are cultures in Siberia that work with teacher plants. Teacher plants is the term I normally use. It's the term that I first learned kind of 40 odd years ago, and I'm afraid you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So teacher plant. They work mostly with fly agaric. I can never remember the Latin name for it. Those little red and white mushrooms, the famous ones. Amamita mascalia or something like that. Oh, hate it when I get words stuck in my head and I can't remember them. Anyway, there are cultures in Siberia that work with those, particularly in Kamchatka. The Kuyak people work with those considerably, both taking quite large quantities of them and inducing visionary trances, but also in kind of like microdosing, often mixed with blueberries, which they consider to be a tonic and an aid to good health. And the old people, not just shamans, but everybody kind of takes those as a sort of tea in such small quantities that they can't actually derive visions from them, but they say it's very good. And you get similar things. I mean, I'm kind of going off at a tangent a bit, but you get similar things in cultures that work with peyote. You can have little bits of it for sore throat and things like that. It's a folk medicine as well as a visionary thing. Now, while we're on the subject of peyote, it's quite important to kind of say that shamanism is a blurred edged thing. It doesn't have nicely defined lines where this is shamanism and that isn't shamanism. It's like there isn't a nice crisp edge to it. So certain cultures practice things which look a little bit shamanic, and it's kind of hard to define whether they are or not. The Huichol from northern Mexico, they work with peyote, and they are by some people considered to be shamanic, and other people don't consider them to be shamanic. I think that's one of the grey areas. Another grey area is Said, the Norse tradition, which is now being reconstructed. That's where the vulva sits on the high seat with a staff, and they sing, and the spirits come into them, and they give forth oracles. They prophesize. That's quite. It's one of those things. It's quite on the edge of shamanism again. It's sort of shamanic because they're motivated by the spirits. The spirits are kind of certainly coming into them, and it's very much a trance state. But if you look at Norse traditions generally, you can't really call it shamanic. So there are anomalies. There are anomalies which are untidy. Life is untidy. It would be lovely to have a nice straight line so that one side of it was shamanic and the other wasn't, but it just isn't like that. And you get the same kind of things in the African traditions too, with like the San Bushman, with the the spirit force that comes up through them. I can't quite remember how to pronounce the word. They're kind of in that semi-quasi-shamanic kind of area as well. Given that shamanism arose in sort of the Siberian area in Mongolia, it couldn't have reached down into Africa. But parallel things have kind of developed in other cultures, such as in Africa. So you have all of these trance cults in, and trance movements in Africa, sorry, which on one level look shamanistic, but on another level actually aren't. The word is problematic. I wish that there was a better way of describing what shamanism is and a better word for it, so that we could perhaps use shamanism for the practices in its homelands around Mongolia, and there was another word that was more global, that the Mongolian kind of traditions and the African traditions and the Australian Aboriginal traditions and all of the other traditions that involve trance could go into, but we don't. This sort of stems from the first popular release of the word shamanism in late 19th century and early 20th century literature, where it was really used to define any primitive religious or religio-magical kind of superstition-filled culture which the highly intelligent white people looked down upon. And so it became a word that was used really for any kind of form of witch doctory, any tribal healer, and it wasn't defined, and so it's become a catch-all word. That has been refined by shamanologists. So shamanologists now, over the last sort of century, have done considerably more study and therefore kind of have a better picture of what shamanism is and what shamanism isn't. But the popular word still retains that general catch-all quality to it, and especially so with the rise of the word with the New Age industry. So yeah, it's a problematic word, and there are kind of anomalies which make it all very untidy. And I like tidiness, but there you go. So, going back to teacher plants, when shamans work with a plant, they're working with the spirit of the plant, and that's also really important to talk about. It's not part of my tradition. As I say, I don't work with teacher plants. I don't even work with drugs. I've never been around drug culture. I don't even drink alcohol, except very, very rarely. I don't like to do mind-altering things other than shamanism. But I obviously know enough about it in passing through because of having to research it for Sacred Hoop magazine and things like that. They work with the spirits of the plants, and the fact that the spirits of the plants produce an intoxicating effect is sort of secondary to the fact that they're working with the spirits, which is why shamans don't do psychedelics. In the Facebook shamanism group, we get a lot of posts about people who think they're shamans and they're taking LSD or they're taking other kind of hallucinogens. Those are synthetic. They don't have the spirits of the plants in them. They're man-made. And so I'm going to be quite categorical and say that shamans don't do drugs. At least good shamans do. I'm sure there are some shamans that do shamanism and may occasionally take some drugs as well, some synthetic stuff. Who knows? But it's not part of their shamanic practice. So the rule is that shamans don't do drugs. Some shamans work with teacher plants, and that's a whole different thing. I also wanted to say that I said kind of shamans don't do meditation, and again that's true, except to say that yes, of course some shamans do meditation, but shamanism and meditation are separate things, and meditation is not part of shamanic practice as such. So a shaman can eat a pizza, but that doesn't mean that pizzas are part of shamanic practice. So it's fine to meditate if you practice shamanism, just don't think that it's the same thing. And the same goes with some of these sort of new agey things like Reiki and whatever. Shamanism is not the same as Reiki, but if you want to do Reiki, that's fine. If you want to eat chocolate bars, that's fine. But like I said, chocolate bars and pizzas are not part of shamanism, and neither is Reiki, and neither is meditation, and neither is yoga. They are not shamanism. Shamanism is what it is by itself. It doesn't have, despite it having blurred edges, they're not that blurred. Thank goodness. So, boy, otherwise we'd be in a terrible mess. I also use a metaphor to talk about the experience that people have regarding shamanism. In terms of people going to a beach, um, some people see the sea from very far away and they never ever visit the sea. And some people, they walk on the beach but they keep away from the waters. And some people, they walk where the waves are breaking and their feet get wet. And some people wade up to their knees in the sea, and some people wade up to their tummies in the sea, and some people wade up to their necks in the sea. And some people learn to swim and some people learn to dive. And that's like it is with shamanism. Some people know that it exists and they see it from far away, but they don't practice it. And other people kind of are walking on the shore of it. And maybe they do some simple things like they thank the spirits and they maybe make offerings. And that's kind of all they do. And then some people work with kind of getting their feet a little bit wet. So they ask for, they may do journeys or they may ask the spirits for help with their own problems. Other people, maybe they ask for help with people in their family. And then other people are kind of much, much more equipped and more skilled, and they dive deep in it. And of course, the deeper you dive, the more dangerous it is. Shamanism is not safe. You're not likely to drown if you're walking on the beach, but if you learn to dive, you might drown. Shamanism is dangerous, but it depends how far you go in. So in the next part, I'm going to talk a little bit about what shamans do and again, what they don't do. So, hope to see you then. Thank you. Bye-bye.